guys? Welcome back. I hope you guys had an amazing weekend. I know that I did, on or off the tables. Today it's time for Metagame Monday. We have, as per usual, 5 legacy challenges with 5 top 8s. That equates to the magic number 40, as you can see here. So that means we have 40 decks to kind of examine and get the weekly check-in on what is doing well. So these are not the metagame percentages. So if you're interested in that, I suggest you just go to something like MTGO Goldfish or whatever. Make sure to filter it after the previous 7 days. That'll be the most updated one. I will say it's super flawed because anybody can upload like a 3-round FNM and then all of a sudden the numbers kind of get skewed. Did people label their decks correctly? This and that. So I'm not really too interested in that. I'm here to see what is winning tournaments, which at the end of the day are the decks you need to be able to beat if you want to win tournaments. So without further ado, let's jump into it. And this week, we had a monstrous week out of Reanimator. So let's see, 8 out of 40, that's 20% of all the top 8s. That is a huge number, are Dimir Reanimator. So Dimir Reanimator is alive and kicking. The versions are very similar, I will say. They seem to focus the same on, like you play the same fatties, more or less play the same plan B, combination of Murktide, Baragoyf, a little bit of Bowmasters, and then some of them have something like Doughty Voidwalker in the mix. And there was even a single spicy one that tried to merge Delver with Reanimator in there. But yeah, Reanimator, huge conversion this week. And yeah, moving forward, we should definitely address that. And by the way, at the end of the video, I will mention the 2 biggest sideboard cards moving into this week of play. But yeah, let's move down the list here. So I've decided to group these tempo decks together. Questing Druid represents Temur Delver, Nethergoyf represents Dimir Tempo, and then a single copy of Molten Collapse represents basically Grixis Delver. So these decks are all Daze decks trying to play 1-drops and attack and, you know, Wasteland, back it up like with stuff like that, but they're of course different. We've talked a little bit about this before where, you know, the Temur version, you have some card advantage in Questing Druid. The blue-black tempo, you have the good mana base, slightly higher card quality, and you're slower. And then the Grixis version tries to play Bowmaster, kind of tries to dodge Blood Moon or stuff like that when it comes to the mana base. And when you play Grixis, you're basically saying, I love Molten Collapse as a catch-all, mainly to kill stuff like Chalice and big creatures like Murktide. And I love my Bowmasters in order to have a leg up against the Temur version. So I'm always interested to see the split between the different variants of Delver. Last week we had a huge uptick in Grixis, and now it seemed like there's just been some correction where decks that are doing well aren't, you know, that scared of Bowmasters. So all of a sudden then black becomes less good. And that's how the pendulum swings when it comes to competitive metagames. Next column is 4 copies of Eldrazi. So welcome back to Eldrazi. Eldrazi takes up 10% of all the top 8s. That's a very, very good conversion rate because that deck has been a less than 5% deck for a while. So converting double that amount is amazing. I believe there was even Eldrazi Mirror in one of the tournaments. So yeah, Eldrazi's back. We have to take it seriously. So let's just note that. Next column is the 3 ofs, 3 copies of Doomsday. And I must say, I'm just super impressed. I've talked about this before. Doomsday is not a deck you can just say, oh, I have some rental program like ManaTraders. What can I play today? Oh, Doomsday looks fun. And then just top 8. That's not going to happen. It's going to be these players who've dedicated years and years, who are active, who are helping each other do better with the deck. And yeah, it keeps performing. So always warms my heart to see an expert deck like this. Worth noting is 0 Painters this week. That's a deck that I oftentimes talk about in the same vein as Doomsday, but no Painter decks this week. 3 copies of Oops All Spells. So in theory, you could add these Oops All Spells decks to decks that put high pressure onto the graveyard, onto this column. Oops All Spells keeps crushing. It's a deck that is mainly winning because it puts a lot of pressure on the opponent's opening hand. If they mulligan a lot, you can punish. If they don't have an answer, you can win straight out the gates. So whenever the opponent guesses wrong, did not respect it enough in deck building, did not respect it enough in mulligans, you pounce. So Oops All Spells, super scary deck. onto the 2-ofs here. We can start with this Fast Reanimator and actually add them over here. Fast Reanimator, you know, Entomb, Faithless Looting, produce a Fast Griselbrand or a Traxa, whatever the case may be. That is still on the cards, despite Oops being played and despite Dimir Reanimator being the top deck. So now we have 13 out of the 40 decks being straight up graveyard decks. Pretty exciting. We have 2 copies of Rite of Flame, so one more person than Killer B decided that comboing off with red rituals is a cool thing to be doing. So I appreciate that a lot. I think it's pretty cool to combat the metagame of a bunch of forces with, you know, the storm mechanic. I will say it's a bit... You will receive some splash damage here from Eldrazi being bigger. If people start playing more consigns, then all of a sudden when you play your Galvanic Relay with 7 Storm, you get consigned, and that's a big problem because the Storm mechanic is meant to get around Force Negation, Spell Pierce, Daze, Force of Will. That's just a topic for another day. Then this is actually my highlight. 2 copies of Beanstalk Control. So Beanstalk is pretty awesome with, you know, Force of Will, your Murktide, your Leyline Binding, and 2 pilots found their way into top 8s of highly competitive tournaments this past weekend. So always happy to mention whenever, you know, quote unquote control does well. I will say I think people have to get used to the fact that control is going to be a hybrid these days. All control decks will have creatures that can finish off the game. We're not, you know, playing One Entreat the Angels like back in the day. That's simply a different era, a forgotten time. Now we will have stuff like, you know, Murktide, Triumph of St. Catherine. What's other good examples? Uro, Forthealinga, stuff that can win the game and kind of close the door on the opponent. A couple of Mono Red Prison. This is the lowest I've seen Mono Red Prison convert since I started the series, and I think we're at episode 8, so a couple of months. Blood Moon, a little bit lower. I expect it to be higher next week, mainly as a reaction to these Eldrazi decks, and of course stuff like Beanstalk and, you know, greedy mana bases getting punished. So Blood Moon on the low here. Let's see if my prediction holds true. Then we have some more Ketramos decks doing well, basically a port from Modern, more or less. This card is quite awesome. People are trying to figure out what's the right shell around it, because it obviously synergizes well with stuff like Emperor of Bones, with Philia, and yeah, just people are starting to learn how to play against, and how to build with this card in general. So super excited, and it looks very promising. This card can do some damage in multiple formats. To round out the top 8, we have our one-ofs, a cool Stoneblade deck. You know, kind of a fan favorite, I will say, when it comes to Legacy. So these decks will do well from time to time, despite not being the best on paper. But they're highly competitive, especially when the players have a decade of experience casting Stoneforge and playing like the mid-range blue deck. Single copy of Breakfast. Nothing to write home about. The deck trended a few weeks ago in the aftermath of the Showcase challenge, which was won by Larson on Breakfast. Since then, it kind of fizzled out and back to being a niche deck. I will also say, since it uses a graveyard, we can even put it here. Then we have some brews to round out, so I'm simply just going to celebrate the fact that it's possible to build a Boros Energy deck and do well in top 8 tournament. Same with staying true to your favorite deck. I can't even remember the name of this deck right now. But it's like the Cradle Control deck. I guess that's the word for it. Basically, originally an evolution of actual Legacy Elves. Then there was another actually up the Beanstalk deck, but this used like Sign of Draco, Leyline of the Guild Pact, and it had like a package when it came to that. I even believe it had Broadside Bombardier, which is a combo with the Draco. So, you know, cool stuff, but not something that's going to revolutionize the format. And then, of course, we have a Goblins player. I actually noticed this Goblins player's name from time to time, and Jarrett's, maybe even Geodude, a little bit of homage to Pokemon. So yeah, it's awesome. You can play Goblin Lackey and actually top 8 a highly competitive tournament. I even believe this person had a 9th place finish, so always excited to see stuff like that. And I think this column of, you know, one-ofs, I guess you can even count like the Killabee variants. Maybe Control goes into that pile as well. like basically the less established decks. I guess it's fair to say that these are established and these are not. And I think when this pile takes up more than 25% of the decks, I'm pretty happy about Legacy. I think it's time for people to figure out how to not just lose to graveyard decks over and over, and start respecting it to a proper degree. I've talked about before how Dimir is a great choice because you can actually play Nihil Spellbob in the main deck. You want artifacts for Nethergoyf, so it's a good excuse to play incidental graveyard hate, where these other decks are having a bit tougher time to fit that. Like, you're not going to play graveyard hate in your Goblins deck or whatever. So I actually think that's a very good hedge against the metagame, being on some Dimir blue deck, tempo-ish. You don't care too much about Blood Moon. You get some percentages against graveyard already for game one, and then you can kind of sideboard your way to a positive matchup against whatever Thought Seizes and Counterspells are just generically good cards against various combo decks. So there's definitely something there. I think I'll look into that in the week to come. So yeah, that kind of sums up the 40 decks that did well and why they did well and what we kind of can do to move forward. So as promised, it's time for the 2 biggest sideboard cards for the week to come. I don't know about the delivery on that one, but I found it funny that Magic Online was like enlarging these cards, and these are in fact the 2 biggest sideboard cards. So yeah, respect Eldrazi some more, respect the graveyard more. That's the final message. Aside from, of course, thanks so much for watching, and I hope to see you back on the channel soon. Bye, guys.